Awesome. Welcome in, everyone.
Like something here.
Oh, thank you so much.
Like that one.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, take care.
Welcome, everyone. Take a moment to get yourself settled in. We're just going to give a couple minutes to allow people to come in, get settled, grab your lunch, warm beverage, coffee or tea. And just a reminding that recording is in progress. So please do keep that in mind as you toggle your camera on or off.
I'm gonna put headphones in because we're not. You can both same if you would like. It's up to you. Yeah, that's fine too. You can like say so.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. We're just giving everyone a moment to get settled in. I'll just give a brief introduction to me. My name is Lindsay. I am a research assistant at the Newcomer Knowledge Hub. And today we are looking at reimagining equitable and anti-oppressive settlement services, perspectives from newcomers and settlement practitioners. We have Susanna and Julie who are joining us from the Social Research Demonstration Corporation today. And we will get started shortly. Okay, just to be mindful of everyone's time, we'll go through some items of housekeeping here. Yeah, so first I just want to say thank you. I know everyone's schedules are busy, so thank you for carving out some time from your day to be a part of this community and share and learn together. I want to start with a land acknowledgement. So I myself am tuning in from the unceded and traditional territory of the Six Nations of the Grand River, as well as the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I do invite you to join the chat, write in where you're tuning in from today. If you have a land acknowledgement of your own, that's more than welcomed. In our land acknowledgement on behalf of K-Hub and ISC, so Immigrant Services Calgary head office is located on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy and the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. Okay, wonderful. So just a couple items of housekeeping. Please do mute yourself when you're not speaking. This just helps to reduce background noises, especially during the presentation. If you're new to our Lunch and Learns, welcome, or Microsoft Teams. Just this little button that's highlighted there is the button to do that. So when you see a line through it, that means you are muted and you are in the clear. Okay, so for our questions, we will be reserving some time at the end of the presentation today to do a bit of a question and answer period. So you're more than welcome to put your questions in the chat. Make sure you don't forget them, and then we can revisit them at the end of the presentation there. During that Q&A period, you're also welcome to do the raise hand function where we will answer your questions as soon as we can. And I see Inder put a land acknowledgement there from BC. That's wonderful. Thank you. So you're more than welcome to keep your camera on or off. That's at your comfortability and your discretion. We do like you to know that recording will be in progress during this entire seminar. We do also take a couple photos for our social media platforms, and those are uploaded on our LinkedIn and our Instagram. So it's totally up to your comfortability if you want to toggle your camera on or off. Great, and if you want to invite your friends or colleagues to our monthly Lunch and Learns, you can share this link to the registration page. There's a QR code there. I also will be putting a link in the chat. And this registration page is updated regularly, so you can sign up for future sessions using this same QR code. Under our upcoming Lunch and Learns, we do have in February, we're talking about perceived discrimination and sense of community belonging among Canadian young adults. And we do hope to see you there. That's on Tuesday, February 25th. You will notice that we've switched our days from Thursdays to Tuesdays. So that is a trend we hope to carry forward on our next couple Lunch and Learns. Okay, and then the last thing before we get to hear from our wonderful presenters is our monthly poll. So as always, if we have 70% of us or more that would like a refresher on Gateway and K-Hub, I can do a quick overview of these initiatives for us. I'm just going to take a moment and launch the poll, and then I'll give about a minute for people to send their answers in so you can tell me if you think you want that refresher. Poll, I think that worked okay. Okay, wonderful. It looks like we're about 50-50 in that case. We are going to go ahead and skip the Gateway and K-Hub refresher today. Yeah, that is a close one, probably the closest we've seen. So we can go ahead and skip to our introductions here. Just give me one moment. Okay, great. So I will just do a quick introduction to both Susanna and Julie. So Susanna is a research fellow at SRDC. Her experience with social and health issues spans across many areas, including a strong focus on settlement services and equity-deserving groups. Julie is a Princess Researcher Associate at the SRDC, and much of Julie's work focuses on ensuring the long-term vitality of French language minority communities and on improving integration and employment outcomes for newcomers to Canada. Great, so I will pass it over to Susanna and Julie.
Great, thank you. Let me just share my screen. Okay, you should now see my screen. So as I said, as Lindsay said, my name is Julie Brodier, and I'm a Principal Research Associate at SRDC, and I'll be speaking a little bit about what SRDC is, but welcome to our session on reimagining equitable and anti-oppressive settlement services, perspectives from newcomers and settlement practitioners. So before I dive in, like I said, I'll just speak a little bit about who we are. So we are a not-for-profit research organization, and we are mission-based. And part of our work is to help policymakers and practitioners identify what works and for whom, with a special concern for the effects of those facing disadvantages. And the other part of our mission is to raise the standards of evidence. And we do that in a number of ways. So basically what we do is we collaborate with organizations or governments to support their work, whether that's to test some programs through experimentation, to do policy research, program evaluation and performance measurement, knowledge mobilization, stakeholder engagement, or by building the capacity of organizations with things like data collection and measuring outcomes. So that's just a little bit of what we do. We work in a number of areas. Susanna and I work mostly in the area of immigration and settlement. But at SRDC, we also work in health, education, disability, youth, lots of areas, other areas as well. So now that's a very short introduction to SRDC. So here's what we'll be spending the next hour doing. So we split the presentation into 3 parts. So the first part will be introducing the project and speaking about how we prepared ourselves and how we designed the project. And then the second part will invite you to participate in an activity, and Susanna will be leading that. And then we are going to jump into the findings from the CARES project and the insights from the co-design sessions. And then we'll invite you to reflect or to ask your questions. So what is this project that we're presenting? So CARES, so Co-Designing for Anti-Racism and Equity in Settlement, is a project that was undertaken between June 2024 and June 2023 and March 2024. It was funded by IRCC in their Service Delivery Improvement Funding on Equity. And the goal of the project was to reimagine and co-create settlement services for newcomers that are free from oppression, to ensure that the settlement sector creates safer and braver spaces for newcomers in their settlement journey. So practically, we sought to generate insights, identify best practices and recommendations, and encourage positive changes for more equitable policy and programming, so that it can contribute to improvements in newcomer integration experiences and outcomes in Canadian society. So these are the research questions that guided us. So we wanted to see what can we learn from racialized newcomers about their experiences with systemic racism, prejudice, and discrimination in their access to settlement and integration services, and what expertise and insights do they have on how to fix settlement services. What can we learn from immigrant serving organizations about the work that they've been doing or are doing to provide anti-racist services? What's been effective? What more can be done? And how can we take these 2 perspectives, so from racialized newcomers and from immigrant serving agencies, and include that with the literature? And how can we co-design recommendation and drive changes for equity, anti-racism, and anti-oppression? So the project was 2 phases. So it was.
I don't know. Call it again.
I'm hearing someone speak. I wonder if people can mute themselves. So the project, as I was mentioning, it's a 2-phase project. It was framed by a gender-based analysis plus, so GBA plus approach that we took to ensure that the project was inclusive and equitable. So the first phase was really one of inquiry and synthesis. So in that we took the time to orient ourselves to the topic and did some background research. I won't go into that too much because I know Susan is going to touch on that in a few slides, but it's also where we did some data collection. So we did a survey for service provider organizations across Canada in French and in English. And the survey aimed to see what was currently being done for anti-racist settlement services and what else is needed. And we were able to get input from 125 organizations. We also did some data collection with newcomers. So we did a background survey to facilitate the recruitment of our focus groups. And in that, we also asked some questions about their experiences, and we were able to get 350 responses. And then for the we did some focus groups virtual with some folks in English, some in French, to understand their experiences of accessing settlement services with a focus on racism and discrimination and understanding what can be done. And in total, we spoke with over 100 newcomers. So phase 2 was really grounded in evidence from phase 1, and it brought together the perspectives of newcomers and immigrant serving agencies. So in these 3 co-design sessions, we did 3 mini sessions with SPOs at conferences just to get a sense of what resonated with folks. And then we did 3 co-design sessions, 2.5 hours each, where we brought in the same room newcomers and service provider organizations to discuss actions and ideas on how to ensure that settlement and integration services are anti-racist and anti-discriminatory. So that's a bit in a nutshell, the methodology that we took. I've been using a lot of terms, and as we go through this presentation, we'll continue referring to these concepts here. And we really think that it's important to define them so that we all have the same scheme of reference. So here, oppression is disadvantage and injustice experienced by groups of people, and in this case, newcomers. Some examples of that include racism, sexism, and ableism, just to name a few. Racism is when people are treated unfairly because of their skin color or background, and it's a kind of discrimination, and it causes great harm to people. Anti-racism is the conscious opposition to racist theories, attitudes, and actions. It's not just about being against the idea of racism, it's also about taking active steps to fight against it. And you've heard me refer to co-design as well, and that refers to a collaborative and participatory approach that involves stakeholders in the design process. And so we made sure to define these concepts in our conversations throughout this project, and I'll pass it on to Susanna to dive deeper into how we prepared ourselves for this project in the approach that we took to frame it.
Thank you, Julie, and also thank you, Lindsay, for the earlier introduction. Hello, everybody. We're quite excited to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit. This was a bit of a difference in how we start our projects. So when we prepared the response to the RFP, we were very intentional about preparing the team. It was a big and diverse team and one that was necessary for the work in this area. We wrote into the proposal our approach to achieving this and requested funding to participate in training and importantly to do it as a team. So at the beginning of the project, the team took part in interactive workshops to situate ourselves within the anti-racism and anti-oppression space. These were facilitated by a third party with subject and context expertise. We took the time to understand and position ourselves within these concepts, reflecting on our roles, beliefs, and actions in relation to these issues. Through this training and workshops, we gain awareness and discuss some topics that may be uncomfortable. Furthermore, we aligned our approach to values we as a team co-developed. These values guided the way we conducted the project and research, including data collection, analysis, and reporting. So next slide, Julie. I'm going to speak to a few of the project values, and we would be happy to share our document with you if you're interested. And in conducting qualitative work, these values are also very important in how we as researchers engage with participants. So I've just put in the three categories I want to mention. We want to make sure our approach was anti-oppressive. So making sure that we clearly explain the process, the purpose of data collection, and how data was going to be used at each step. We were very mindful of the language we use and defined oppression and anti-racism prior to engaging, as we did here in the discussions on the topic. And we were also, again, mindful of the questions we were asking. We paid people for their time. We also allow participants to have their camera on or off because these were virtual sessions. And this, I won't talk too much about it, but this actually worked in some cases, but it also had some challenges for us. We also made, because of the topic we were talking about, we also made available a list of mental health resources for those who participated in the focus groups. We treated all participants and stakeholders with respect and consideration, valuing their diverse perspectives and their experiences. It was really important that we remain curious and open-minded throughout the whole process. Newcomers, as you know, are a very diverse group and the experiences will vary. And being accepting that others may have different experiences than our own. So we purposely seek to engage as many diverse voices as possible. And then we also focus on respect and reciprocity. We recognize the importance of reciprocity. We share back what we heard from the data collection at the beginning of the 3 co-design sessions. We also sent out a summary of what we heard during the co-design sessions to participants, and this helped ensure transparency and meaningful engagement. And some other areas we did touch on in our values about authenticity and transparency, just the continuous learning for us and with our participants, and also leveraging the strengths. Next slide. So as promised, we're going to try out a privilege exploration activity with you, and we hope you will all participate. Just to frame this first before I explain how we're going to be doing this, sometimes we don't notice our privileges because they are so deeply embedded in our culture. Every day we experience cultural and social expectations that may reflect privilege of certain groups. At the same time, and especially in the work you do in the settlement area, we also encounter marginalized communities and viewpoints that deserve to be heard, to have a voice. Recognizing our privileges help us understand why we think and act the way we do. So to better understand our interactions, we need to consider how different privileges and challenges overlap. This perspective is important because it shows how each privilege and disadvantage exists in its own way, but it's connected to others. So we want to engage in this activity, but just a few notes of critique. This is not comprehensive. It's meant to be an introduction to intersectionality and privilege. And furthermore, Julie and I are not experts in this area. And when we actually did this with our trainers, it was much more visual. So you're getting kind of the cheaper version, the pen and paper version is this. So so keep in mind the scale on the bottom. I'm going to read 10 statements. And with each statement, I'm going to ask you to either add a point or take a step forward on the line or to take a step backwards. So at the end of the 10 statements, you should be on a position along this line. You could remain maybe at 0. That's our starting point at 0. That's where you will start. Or you could be further up, maybe 3 or 4 or even further, or you could be in the negative. And then at the end, we'll do a little bit sharing on this. So everyone starts with a base of 0. I'm going to read 10 statements, and depending on your answer to those questions, you'll either go 1 point up or 1 point behind. Just to make sure, I'm going to start, but is that clear to everybody? So keep track of where you're going. All right, I'm going to start. If you see a group of people you identify with widely represented in the media, take 1 step forward. If your native language is not English, please take 1 step back. If you were ever called names, because of your background, take one step back. If your parents were or are professionals, doctors, lawyers, etc., take one step forward. If you are taught the culture and history of your ancestors in school, take one step forward. If you ever try to change your appearance, mannerisms, or behavior to avoid being judged, ridiculed, or gaining more credibility or belonging, take one step back. If you were ever denied access to academics or jobs because of your background, please take one step back. If you were ever offended by a joke or remark about people you identify with, but felt unsafe to confront the situation, take a step back. If you were born in Canada, take one step forward. If you were encouraged by your parents to attend school, take one step forward. Okay, so you should either have added all your scores or moving along this line, you will have a score from -5 to 5. And Lindsay's going to share a poll with us. And we ask you if you're comfortable to answer this poll question and share your score. It will be anonymous and we will only show the aggregate results. Okay, I'll just give it maybe about 30 seconds more in case anyone else wants to share. Okay, this is quite interesting shape if I can actually, if I was able to graph it, from low, high, and then dips, and then high again, and so forth. Yeah, I also, when I did this exercise, I was, it actually brought a lot of insights to me and kind of looking at my own experience. So I want to open this time, maybe about 5 minutes or so, if a, one or two or maybe a few people would like to share just maybe your thoughts and feelings as you were doing this exercise, or how this exercise might have made you think differently about your own identities and your experience and relationship with people. So if you're comfortable with sharing, unmute yourself or raise your hand, or you can actually put your comments in the chat as well if you like. Yeah. Someone wrote in the chat that class system in Canada had an impact on how the person answered the questions. Lindsay, I can't see the list. Does anyone have their hands up or hand up?
Not right now that I can see. Usually they will plop to the front of your screen there.
And then maybe we can come back to this at the end if people want to talk a little bit about this exercise at the end in our final reflections. So with that, I am going to pass it over to Julie to continue with CARES.
Thanks, Susanna. Yeah, if you have, as we go through this presentation, if you have any thoughts on this activity and or what this brought up for you or however you felt, just feel free to put it in the chat and we can discuss at the end. Okay, great. So now that we've kind of situated ourselves a little bit with what this project is and what are some of the key concepts, and that we've had some time to reflect on the different things that might affect people's experiences of just being in Canada, I want to walk you through some of the findings from this project. So I'll just take a step back a little bit, and I won't go into details here, given that most of you probably work with newcomers or have in the past. So you know that newcomer settlement is a period of adjustment to life in Canada. It involves various tasks and processes. For some, it might involve accessing services as well. And just like Susanna reminded us, the intersection of characteristics of newcomers, such as their gender, the culture, religion, family dynamics, the impact of migration, and experiences of discrimination may to varying degrees influence the experiences of settlement in Canada. And this is not an exhaustive list here, but some of the settlement and integration barriers for newcomers in Canada can include things like difficulty securing housing, not having Canadian work experience, or not having their credentials recognized, so having some language barriers, not knowing about available settlement services, and for of particular interest to this presentation, racism and discrimination that newcomers may experience within the community or within accessing services. So we know from Statistics Canada that almost 50% of adult newcomers who migrated to Canada between 2016 to 2020 accessed at least one type of settlement services. Most of them, it's information and orientation services, given that that's one of the services that's accessed the most. But in information and orientation services encompass things like providing newcomers with information needed to integrate into Canadian society. So when we asked the participants who took part in our research, most of them had used settlement services, and that's not really surprising given that we recruited participants mainly from through service provider organizations, given that we wanted them to have a sense of their experiences with using settlement services. So one of the first things we asked was how satisfied were they with their experiences of using settlement services? And it was mixed. So about 50% of respondents said they were satisfied or dissatisfied, but still almost a quarter, 27% were dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. And we'll go into the next few slides just to maybe explain some of the satisfaction versus unsatisfaction and satisfaction with services. So some of the things that they were saying in terms of the positive experiences with settlement services, they mentioned that the services and the supports that they received were helpful and that they were able to connect, to feel more connected. They also mentioned that generally settlement services were welcoming and practitioners were nice and helpful to them. And the words that they used to describe settlement services were like attentive, supportive, accommodating, helpful, respectful, and friendly. And we also see that in this last bullet here, the particular ways that settlement services help them, such as getting information about the labor market and job search in Canada, for some finding employment, finding housing. These were ways that they were able to use settlement services. In terms of negative or unhelpful experiences that they mentioned, the positive and negative are quite aligned with what we find in the literature as well. but we heard that settlement services were not tailored enough to meet the diverse needs of newcomers. And that and sometimes that employment services were not helpful in helping to find commensurate employment. There was some mention of some settlement workers lacking empathy, sympathy, or understanding in interactions with newcomers. And facing having difficulty accessing services, either because of language barriers or services not being available in their communities. And pertaining the most to this project is, and what we heard often from newcomers, is that they experience racism or a lack of understanding from settlement workers, or they experience or witness other newcomers being treated with bias, stereotype, or prejudice by settlement workers. And the racism and discrimination is not as well documented in the literature as compared to these other negative or barriers to settlement services. So here we have two figures in terms of perception and experiences of racism and discrimination related to settlement services. So if I start with the bottom figure, so that's from newcomers. So we asked them if they had experienced racism and discrimination when accessing settlement services, and about 73% of them said that they had. And of those that had experienced racism and discrimination, more than half reported that race was the top reason for their experience with discrimination. But that was followed by physical appearance, language, sexual orientation, and religion. But you can see here, there's other ones as well. We also asked service providers the extent to which racism and discrimination are an issue for newcomers when accessing settlement and integration services. And here you can see that 37% said always or often, 50% said sometimes, but a very small minority, 13%, said rarely or never. So we'll explore a little bit more these experiences of racism and discrimination. So so the next three slides, so we broke it down, the experiences of racism and discrimination at three levels. So the first level is individual or interpersonal level. Then there's at the organizational level. And then there is a third one that we called replication of oppression. So I'll go through each of these and I'll give specific examples of what we heard and how this came into the conversations. So at the individual and interpersonal levels, we heard that although it was not named directly by newcomers, participants indicated several instances of racial microaggressions, such as, so they didn't use racial microaggressions, is what I'm saying, but they spoke about experiences of being treated differently by service providers compared to other clients because of their race or ethnicity. Being neglected by service providers and ignored or talked down to by service providers. They also described encounters with service providers who were not culturally understanding or sensitive to their needs, which led newcomers to feel frustrated and disrespected. Service providers also acknowledged this perspective, and they explained that settlement organizations sometimes lack an understanding of the different cultural needs of their newcomer clients, and sometimes don't ask the key questions that are needed to understand newcomers' unique situations. So specifically, an example is some newcomer participants told us about experiences where service providers refused to make an effort to pronounce their names correctly or inaccurately recorded their names on documentation. Newcomers also mentioned that the lack of cultural sensitivity enabled power imbalances, and contributed to their marginalization, which further led to feelings of discomfort when accessing settlement and integration services. For some, there was also situations where service providers failed to recognize the importance of newcomers' individual identities, as opposed to being part of like a newcomer group or like a group of a cultural group. And there was, in particular, Black newcomer participants shared situations where service provider made negative ascriptions of education or field of work based on racial assumptions. And so both the service providers and newcomers mentioned that there is sometimes assumptions that are made on the kinds of supports or services that are needed based on the newcomer's country of origin or appearance. Black newcomer participants shared instances where service providers treated them unfairly based on their prejudice against Black people, or they felt they received differential treatment compared to other non-Black newcomers. So what I just spoke about was like at individual level, so like one-on-one between the staff and the person, or between people. This is more at an organizational level. So many participants described their experiences of oppression at an organizational level, where they felt they were treated merely as a checkbox or part of a daily quota to be met by settlement organizations. And that expressed itself as frustration at not being seen as whole individuals and not necessarily receiving meaningful support, leading some to question the true intentions of settlement and integration services. There was also mention of a lack of sensitivity or empathy due to the need to meet bureaucratic requirements. And these highlighted oppressive dynamics that exist at an organizational levels, where newcomers may not be seen as individuals with unique needs and experiences, but rather subjected to impersonal and insensitive treatment. So there is one service provider referred to as explained that funding and reporting are based on colonial structures, which can create barriers for holistic service delivery. Funding and eligibility constraints also within the settlement sector were also mentioned as barriers. So in other words, what we mean here is that while service providers often understand the need to support newcomers holistically, there is that tension between the needs of the clients and the systemic constraints. And these findings emphasize how funding and reporting requirements, for example, may limit the ability of service providers to offer holistic support to newcomers. And I put a quote here, and I think we have time to read it, but it just says, just as of yesterday, I was talking to someone, this is a newcomer speaking. Just as of yesterday, I was talking to someone at a settlement organization. So we were trying to talk about placement or something like that. There's this particular program that I'm trying to get into. And you know what I was saying about giving proper training to the people who interact with newcomers like us? I was certain that she was reading off a script. She asked my level of English, and I was taken a little aback. We've been talking for like 10 to 15 minutes. Even if that was part of the question she's supposed to ask me, I should think that common sense should dictate that to determine that by now, you know my level of English because we've been speaking for 15 minutes. That wasn't even the first time. But things like that, people should be trained in emotional intelligence to be able to understand the clients that settlement workers are dealing with. So this is just one situation of a newcomer describing that she felt that that person was not seeing who they were. The third type of experiences of racism and discrimination, we called it replication of oppression. And so it was newcomers described situations where some service providers replicated oppressive practices commonly experienced by newcomers while looking for employment. and therefore perpetuated discrimination from employers. For example, newcomers shared that service providers encouraged some newcomers to anglicize their names on resumes or dismissed newcomers as being overqualified without offering meaningful support on how to navigate the job market effectively. So one participant said that an organization that was providing employment-related services suggested that they change their name to something more English, therefore reinforcing the notion that non-English names are somehow less acceptable in the Canadian labor context. There's also some discussions around service providers not really listening to the individual employment goals and interests that newcomers were saying despite their previous education and skills. And sometimes service providers were instead suggesting that they pursue other paths or pushing newcomers to find survival jobs to obtain their initial Canadian work experience. This is something that may be replicating oppressive norms that devalue the needs and aspirations of newcomers. And here's a quote to that effect. So this is an experience that a newcomer shared. So when I got my PR, they moved me to see an employment consultant. The problem is they had no resources for my background. I have a master's in public health. They had nobody who knew what I should do and how to navigate. Then they started saying I was overqualified. In that whole process, at one point, I was suggested that I should change my name. So they were well-meaning. They said, usually when somebody sees your CV, the first thing they see is your name, and it's not an English name. It would help if you had another calling name, which was more English. And I was like, this is what I'm born with. This is what my parents have proudly named me, and I'm not changing it. So this is kind of an experience that highlights several of the points that I just mentioned. So the important question is, how do these experiences of racism and discrimination impact newcomers' future experiences with accessing settlement services and beyond, honestly? So we asked service providers exactly that. And so first, it can create barriers of access to service. So because newcomers may be reluctant to access future services, or they may choose to not go back to that organization, then it might impact their ability to access services, given that they've chosen not to go back, or to limit the kinds of services that they receive. And it might also lead to negatively impact newcomers' trust in settlement services, which can then contribute to additional barriers and delays for newcomers to successfully integrate into Canada if they're not accessing the services that they need. And aligned with that is that some newcomer participants, mentioned that they did not go back to the same to services, so they just chose to not access these. And overall, these negative experiences may have effects on newcomers' emotional well-being and mental health, where they lose their sense of belonging and feel the loss of hope, faith, and trust. So I've spoken a lot about newcomers' experiences, although we did interweave the experiences of service providers, but we did ask this question of service providers. So what do they think are the main issues related to racism and discrimination for newcomers accessing settlement and integration services? So here, the predominant issues reported included assumptions about the services they needed by newcomers, assumptions regarding newcomers' education and or skills, assumptions about newcomers' work and life goals, and limitations in the job options offered to clients. Interestingly, although respondents were asked about racism and discrimination for newcomers accessing settlement and integration services, about 10% of the sample indicated that the primary issue lied beyond the settlement and integration services sector. And this suggests that some respondents are putting the responsibility outside of the settlement sector and not within their own services. So in order to understand what's currently being done about racism and discrimination in the settlement sector, because we know there's a lot of things that organizations have already done, we asked service providers the extent to which their organization actively applied an anti-racist lens throughout their activities. About 50% of them said that anti-racism was actively applied in a lot of the time in their activities. 26%, so about a quarter of folks reported that their organizations always integrated anti-racism throughout their activities. And about another quarter reported that anti-racism was applied some or little of the time. And to dive deeper, we asked them specifically. So this graph that you see here was asked only answered by management who filled out our survey, but it was what are they doing to address racism and discrimination in the services that they deliver? So as you can see here, general actions were more common, but concrete or specific actions to make real changes were less so. So you can see, for example, 81% reported that their organization promotes diversity and inclusion. 74% said that they carry out some personal education, training, and reflection. But only 23% had developed an anti-racism action plan, or 40% reported to supervisors any incidents of racism and discrimination. I think that's on the other figure, but so more general actions were more common. And you can see here at the individual level as well, the most common action that was taken at the individual level was personal education and training or engaging in discussions. And here, as I mentioned, like reporting to supervisors was less common, or encouraging organizations to take anti-racist actions. We also wanted to know what were some of the challenges that service providers faced in implementing anti-racist practices in their organizations. So you can see here, and these might help to explain the differences in the types of actions that were taken. So most respondents pointed out to the lack of organizational resources, so human and financial, as a major challenge, so about 43%. And then less than 20% reported that there's a lack of knowledge or competency, lack of training, lack of service options offered to clients, and lack of awareness. So the main one was really around lack of organizational resource. And I'll wrap it here for myself, and I'll let Susanna speak about what we learned from the co-design pieces.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about the results from phase 2, the 3 co-design workshops. We had 47 participants in the 3 workshops, 30 newcomers, and 17 service providers attending. I want to start by sharing with you a quote from one of our newcomers in the co-design session. When asked about what anti-oppressive and anti-racist settlement services look like, ideally. So the person said, for me, an ideal settlement service is one where you feel welcome and supported, so that you don't go there with worries, come back with the same worries, or come back feeling even more stressed. At least a place where even if you don't necessarily have solutions to all your problems, you still have support until you are truly operational on Canadian territory. And I also think that settlement services should be able to provide information in real time and to everyone, to all those who have access to these settlement services. I'm thinking, for instance, of circumstances where people who use the same settlement service receive different information. And I recall in focus groups that came up repeatedly. So for example, you meet another newcomer who uses the same settlement service as you, and he has information that you don't, and tells you that he received it from that service. It would be nice if everyone was informed. I don't know, maybe sending emails when there is an update. Why not inform everyone through the same service or channel? Support is very important. Next slide. The team was really also very grateful and acknowledged that we received many valuable insights from our co-designers. So at the beginning of each session, we share not as much in great detail as Julie has with you, results and findings from these surveys and the focus group. And we share that with participants, and then we ask for their reflections on that, to what they've heard. And the reactions and responses to what you've heard from Julie, the co-designers, it varied. Many participants said they were not surprised to learn that racism is present in settlement services, while a few others expressed surprise with the findings of perceived racism and oppression in settlement services. They noted that the practitioner and client relationship matters, and it matters a lot. Several points were raised about the importance of these relationships. The fact that many service providers are newcomers themselves, that's an asset. And trust. Establishing trust was mentioned by several newcomers, including trusting the practitioner to provide the right information at the right time and to guide and support them on the path they want to take. And participants also agree with many of the findings. They noticed that racism and oppression show up in services, including lack of services in the newcomer's first language, and especially with employment. It was noted frequently that oppression relates with employment services, such as the need for Canadian work experience, the assessment of experience acquired outside Canada, networking, and the push towards survival jobs. One participant called that need for Canadian work experience as oppressive. And then also the absence of personalized services that considers the newcomer's individual needs and strengths. And also the time practitioner, because with funding and with requirements, sometimes there's just not enough time for practitioners to better understand the needs of the clients and to support them. So these are limits that are imposed by external factors that are beyond the practitioner's control. There are also complex ways that oppression operates within and between newcomer and Canadian-born communities. Some of the racism and the global tensions and resentment towards refugees and undocumented newcomers, and then the importance of teaching newcomers about Canada's colonial history. That's also very important for reconciliation. And some of the reflections in the recommendations from the early reflections from the findings include the need for client-focused services, personalized services, anti-oppression training for service providers, making sure we take an intersectional lens in service design and delivery, and training for employers about diversity, empathy, equity, and inclusion, and the importance of getting service feedback from newcomer clients. So next slide. Then we went into generating and asking our co-designers for their ideas about what it looks like for anti-oppressive and anti-racist settlement services. And they provided lots and lots of feedback. And just before I get into what we heard, I just want to explain a bit about the framework we use to categorize the ideas. So, I think from what you've heard earlier from Julie too, the experiences of newcomers shared, as well as from the service providers, they do illustrate that racism and oppression exists within the settlement services, and especially within the employment services realm. So what we used was a socio-ecological model to acknowledge that people impact and are impacted by complex interplay between the individuals, the interpersonal, the communities, and the environmental interactions. And we group these into 4 levels. Individual, this is what people working in the settlement organizations can do individually. This is also still linked to interpersonal, the relationships, how people, including practitioners and their interactions with newcomer clients matter. And then organizational, how organizational policy and strategies can reduce oppression. And then the bigger tasks, the societal, the macro level, changes that can help change systemic oppression. Because often I think services, we kind of address things that are more at the individual levels, but it's the systemic barriers that are sometimes harder to address. And what I'm going to actually share with you next, it's going to align very much with what you've already heard earlier from our findings and also from the literature. So next slide. So some of the insights, and our report actually details this in a lot more detail than what we're actually getting here. So I'm just going to really just touch on some of the highlights. So in terms of what the individual settlement workers can do, there were 2 areas of focus, one on service delivery. Taking an inclusive approach to service delivery with kindness, active and generative listening, and delivering with empathy and offering help, including micro affirmations, providing honest, solid guidance with empathy, and taking a client-centered, trauma-informed approach. They also suggested ways about addressing unconscious bias, because that would help potentially with avoiding assumptions, prejudices, and also recognition of the newcomer's multiple identities. And on the second level, with the interpersonal relationships, here we're considering the impacts of these interactions, how people affect each other. The recommendations that we received were focused very much on the person-to-person interactions between service providers and their clients, as well as with the peers and other colleagues at the organizations. You know, for example, when a newcomer comes into an organization, their first interaction may be with someone at the reception desk and also in the reception area. So making sure that the environment is welcoming and the people who are greeting the folks for the first time, that first interaction is warm and positive. They also mention having a diverse background of practitioners. That helps a lot, you know, making sure different cultures, gender, language, age, and so forth. And building trust and maybe doing this with also regular checkups. So not just having that first meeting, but making sure there's follow-up to see perhaps maybe what else is needed. Active listening, listening carefully to clients' needs and meeting them where they're at and asking questions instead of making assumptions. The third is organizational. And we actually did get quite a long list here. And I think this combined with some of the findings from the survey, I think those would be good areas for exploration for organizations. So at the organizational level, we're considering how the organizations engage with newcomer communities and how internal factors within the organization can support or perpetrate racism and oppression. Our co-designers gave us quite a list of recommendations in several areas, including client engagement, especially again at the initial contact, on services and support, and about the physical and psychological space, making sure it is safe and a place where people can be brave, and organizational training as well. Briefly, they talked about tailoring to the diverse and specialized needs of clients, those who are recently arrived, also the needs of those who have been here for a while, but still experiencing challenges. Francophone and other linguistic groups, employment services, need to better recognize newcomers' strengths and assets, and rather than just focusing on deficits. And focusing on training and capacity building in the anti-oppression areas, and implementing organizational changes, taking anti-racist policies, taking an organizational-wide approach, and using an intersectional approach and building on strength of partnerships in order to do more. And again, getting feedback from newcomers about services. So again, these are things and themes and items that you've heard already throughout our presentation. So at the macro level, funding came up, of course, and the suggestion was making equity a priority in funding and inviting funders to listen to the needs and concerns of frontline staff and incorporating reconciliation by educating newcomers on the true history and ongoing impact of colonization and encouraging advocacy as a role for service providers. And I think this, I've seen discussions already of this, making sure there's inclusive leadership at all levels of settlement organizations, and including measures with suitable metrics to track progress. And in some of our equity work, we've learned that if you don't measure it, it's not going to, it's needed, the measurements, in order to have those dialogues, that conversation, in order to keep moving forward. So that, in a nutshell, was some of the insights we heard. And then if you can go to the next slide, Julie. We asked at the focus groups, and I want to end with this before we go into our reflections. We asked our participants what anti-racist and anti-oppressive settlement services should look like. And we got lots and lots of feedback here, informed, diversity, sensitive, integrated, helpful, friendly, empathetic, tailored, equity proactive, knowledgeable, intentional, inclusive, honest. So that, I think that really, again, our words and to have kind of more dialogues about, practice and how we are delivering. But there were also, and I want to mention that there were also a lot of newcomers in the focus group who spoke so highly of their practitioners and the help they got too. And that was really, really appreciated. So Julie, next slide. So that's it. We've done a lot of talking and lots of information that we've pushed out. We don't like to do this, but we also think that there was a lot of value in what we heard from the different stakeholders, and that's all documented in our report. And we're happy to share that with you. A little bit light reading, 50 pages, I think. But if you like some of the quotes that Julie shared earlier, there's a lot more of that in the report. And it really makes the what we heard in the numbers come alive and really touch our heart and connects our mind and our heart. So we want to turn this time over to you. I think we have about 20 minutes. And just anything from you about, what you've heard, what, if anything, resonated with you? Was there anything surprising? And, going back to the exercise, I want to mention one thing, because I know when we first did it as a group, we kind of took a step back and then we talked about it more later on. And that very much is, I think in some of the other projects I've worked on, service providers are also on different stages in their anti-racism and anti-oppression journey. And this may also be the case here. And the exploratory activity was, I think, particular may be helpful for those in the early phases to discover and learn more about privileges in a hands-on way. And we hope that it will spark curiosity and further learning, as well as I think what we presented here, that it would, promote further discussions in this area. So I think, Julie, do you want to unmute yourself too? So we will
Yeah.
open it up for any questions or comments. Please feel free to share.
Thank you both so much. That was such a wonderful presentation and so much information there. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions and even thoughts or comments roll in. I think I did see a hand up, and I'm not sure if nor Gabby nor Gaby, if you still want to speak, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so thank you so much for the great presentation and for sharing the information that you go through the research. And yeah, definitely you have very good information that we can incorporate in our organization as well, because for me, it resonates the portion where an immigrant say, hey, I was talking to my settlement provider, and after 15 minutes, they were asking me, what is your English level? Yeah. So I agree with that, because there are different benchmarks or ways or scales to measure your English levels, and they are going to vary depending on the organization that you use. For example, the levels or scale that TOEFL or IELTS or CELPIC test use are different. Yeah. So even we have a different scale here at Immigrant Services Calgary. We have the Language Assessment and Referral Center. And then let's see that we receive an immigrant. We can see that that immigrant can communicate with us verbally. We don't know yet about how is the reading and writing level for that client. Yeah, and let me tell you, we interact daily with clients that might be literacy because they have less than 10 years of formal education, but they have an amazing English in the level of speaking and listening. But maybe they say they are struggling with the reading and writing part. Yeah. And vice versa. You have some immigrants that they are good with reading and writing, but speaking and listening, they have that weakness, yeah, because they need to improve. They haven't used the English at that level of conversation, yeah, only for writing letters, business purposes, yeah. So yeah, definitely this is something that resonates with me, that maybe we need to change that portion when we ask them, because sometimes you might have a client that is very confident, and even an expert can say this client is low to intermediate level in English. That person feel comfortable, and when you ask, what is your English level? No, I believe my English level is higher. I can communicate very well. On the other hand, I have other clients that I can see that they can communicate, but they are very shy to speak, and then they might consider themselves, no, my English is very basic. But I say, no, it's not basic. I'm asking you question and you are able to reply to me in a clear way. So the only way to know what is the level is if they have a document that provide the evidence about what is their English level. Another thing that I can say based on my own experience is that sometimes everything is going to depend on the perception that newcomer has about themselves and how they perceive things. Every person, if you could, maybe 2-3 persons can be on the same situation and perceive things in a different way. Yeah, because cultural, personality, different factors here. And I remember when I came as a newcomer, regarding the names. Yeah, when I was looking for a job, I work with some settlement providers. One of them was Siwa. And they used to tell us they used to invite recruiters, and what the recruiters say, maybe this is definitely, we are in Canada, we say the Constitution says you cannot discriminate, but how do you prove that you were discriminated? There is no way. What those recruiters say, if I see a long name that I cannot even pronounce, so I'm going to put aside uh, that curriculum vitae. So here, that resume. So here you see that is not that the settlement provider is being discriminatory or providing biases. It's just being realistic. It's telling you what you need to do if you really want to land a job and what is going to be an obstacle for you to land a job. Okay, so this is my point of view here, something that I want to express.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on the findings and how it resonates with what you do in your work. I see that there's another
And I want
hand.
to add also, yeah, just sometimes we have to work within the system, but when that happens, then change doesn't happen either. But a lot of it is just being aware sometimes because you're so busy. Sometimes you can't step back and you're working with structures that go, oh my gosh, is this really happening? Because you're too busy and your view is on different paths instead of being mindful of some of these issues. So I think that's what when our person who shared when she was speaking, that's what it reminded me of. Yeah.
Thank you. I see we have a couple different hands. Looks like Samina, you're next.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Thank you so much for that informative session. The PowerPoint's very informative, insightful. I have a comment. I just have two comments. One is obviously as settlement workers, gateway planners, frontline workers in this industry, I have come to realize there are three key elements that are absolutely essential when we're in this business. We need to be respectful, empathetic, and resourceful. And when it comes to dealing with clients, of course, they're coming from different backgrounds. They're very sensitive. Migration is one of the key stressors in life. Talking about their English language and, how they should or should not be changing. Number one, we don't have any authority to be saying such things. It's not polite or it's not even appropriate. However, if we are asking or inquiring about their English levels, it's the tone of voice that matters. We might be saying something very genuinely, a question asked, and they sense the tone of voice. So in our business, in our this job, it's very important that we're very mindful of our tone of voice. How are we coming across? Are we informing? Are we directing them? Or are we suggesting and supporting? Thank you.
Thank you, Samina.
Wonderful. We can proceed there on to Inder is next.
Yes. Yes, first of all, thank you for the wonderful presentation. Yeah, at first, I just want to quickly agree with Samina as well. I mean, as far as asking for the English level, it could just be a misunderstanding on the part of the client. But again, like Samina had said, the tone and also the assumption, we cannot assume that everyone's familiar with the same lingo as we are when we're asking these questions. So if you are to ask a question like that, I think it's valuable to give some kind of explanation or feedback first and say, hey, we have a Canadian level benchmark and this is what we go by. Are you familiar with that? Do you know what your score is? Something like that. So just to give some background, I think makes all the difference. And, we see so many clients and sometimes we're just so into it that we don't realize that we do need to take that step back and, and be empathetic and aware like that. So thank you for that. Second, I actually had a question in regards to the privilege exercise. I'm sorry I didn't bring it up before. It just kind of came to me afterwards. There was one question that I was kind of interested in, and that was the one about, and I'm sorry, Susanna, you may have to repeat that question for me because I didn't write it down word for word, but it was in regards to your representation of a majority. Was it in media or could you rephrase that question?
Right. Yeah. So, and maybe I'm old school and I'm thinking about newspapers and so forth, right? So, and so in terms of just the news article, do you identify, with some of the stories that are presented in news articles or,
Okay. So what I found interesting is that you said to take a step forward, right? So in my understanding, sometimes like you're identifying with a group that's in the media that's shown in a negative way.
Yeah.
So, right. So then for me, like when you were saying that question right away, I'm seeing like what's being depicted in the media right now as far as like immigration and numbers and deportations and all that kind of stuff. So then for me, it would definitely have been a step the other way. So it's interesting, how the perception of that question. So yeah, that was just my
No, good
insight.
point. Yeah, and I think and these questions are a bit dynamic, just like immigration. Every year you get different numbers, maybe different groups. This was probably done in a way where when you think about the news or even in movies where it's race racialized people had different roles in movies, right? It's not until more recently you've got, the joy from people who saw Crazy Rich Asians, right? It's
That's
an
right. Yeah.
all Asian cast. So I think and that's a really good point. So if we were to do this again, we will be mindful of questions and whether or not it reflects the current situations. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I believe it's Hanny.
Yes, you're right. Thank you for the wonderful presentation, and I actually adore what you're doing there. It's it's a very nice initiative that to imagine that to have this kind of anti-racism and anti-oppressive framework that can reduce the inequalities and the barriers, right, for the immigrants and refugees that are coming to Canada. And I understand that this is something that we might need to improve over time, and it might take a bit of what you call effort from all the sectors, starting from like the system and going back to the individual part, just like you mentioned in your presentation. I just wanted to add two more points that I feel that like assist me in my everyday when I'm meeting clients. Is that whenever I'm meeting a client, I do not assume because that client does not speak English or his English is a bit um, low that they don't know anything or they are experts in their own experiences and they're experts in their needs. So always putting in mind that the client is our focus and the client is what we're here to do. It's not like Samina, it's like Samina said, it's not like we are shaping the person to become something that what you call uh, becomes like part of the image that we are that's happening now or the social media or whatever. No, it's we're trying to help them to understand how things go in Canada and just give them the tips so they can figure out their own way, right? That's what we do. And the second thing is it's okay to feel that like or it's okay that to challenge the power dynamics when it comes to client and the settlement worker. It's okay, right? We are here to improve. We are here to change. We are here to know more about the services and how we can support those kind of clients. And we are immigrants. I'm an immigrant, right? So I had my first-hand experiences, and I understand like from the like from the exercise we had before. I have my own experiences, and I do understand that there are people who led me a hand. They didn't give me the fish, they just showed me how to fish. One of them is Samina Arif, right? So that's how it should be. So always be open. Let's be kind. Let's be how can I say? Let's find the right balance between sharing info or information and guiding people, right? Instead of just judging and having our own perspectives lay on to the new clients. Basically, this is what I wanted to say. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's probably touches a lot of us too in very meaningful ways. And I can, before we go to our next person, I just want to comment. I love this conversation. I think sometimes when we do research, um, disseminating it and sharing it and hearing about other people, their reactions to it and their own experience, I think as a community, this I think is quite valuable too, that practitioners can share and, with each other. And I also want to point out that, from a lot of the work we've done with newcomers, you give them a lot of hope and confidence in terms of their integration and settlement journey. And that's really important. And how you do it is so important. So I'm going to shut up now.
Wonderful. And it looks like we still have one hand up. I would love for you to introduce yourself. I can see Practicum 1. So please go ahead.
Hello. Yes, my name is not Practicum 1 legally. My name's Lydia. I'm just a student with Mount Royal here in Calgary, completing a practicum at SAGES. I wanted to first thank the facilitators for the information they shared and going into depth about the research. I feel really grateful to have received that information, and also just want to express my gratitude to the other people who asked their questions and stated their perspective. But for my question, I just want to clarify. So I believe you all said that researchers attended a anti-racism or anti-oppressive training prior to conducting research. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm getting the head nod. So I was wondering if this was facilitated from an organization outside of yours,
Yes.
so it was, and what went into when you were considering who you wanted to do the facilitation and what outcomes you were looking for? Because I often find some of those trainings look at ticking a box and aren't very engaging. So yeah, what was your perspective on that?
This is an organization that some of us were familiar with. They have done work in this area for a while, but in particular, they were also doing oppression in the Indigenous communities, but they have also been doing work in the settlement area too. So we had a conversation with them first, but also corporately, we took, when we were approved the funding, which was really good, we also asked our HR department to be looking for, different trainers as well, so that we not just settle on what we already know or who we're familiar with. So we get that breadth, but also in some of the work I've done, there's been other trainers that I've been exposed to as well. So we had a discussion with the trainer to articulate what it is that we're doing, and that really very much giving us that confidence too to embark on this work, because we anticipate that when we go into the focus groups, we're going to be also talking about issues, and we have to be sensitive, we have to be active listening, we have to take a lot of care too as people share very stories that were very maybe challenging for them, and how we respond to that. We needed to be prepared, but it also starts with being working on ourselves. The anti-oppression is a journey that we all take individually. So as a group, we did it together, but individually, some of us are further along because we've done more work, but there were also people on the team that I would suggests that we're quite early, and sometimes those blocks are still there because you don't know what you don't know, right? So as an exercise, that was really good. So we articulated what our purpose was, and they had some workshops that they already have been delivering, but they customized that for us, and they delivered that to us. And they've just been facilitators in this area for years. So we found it, most of us found it useful. There were some that kind of said they weren't quite sure. So, but the majority, we found it useful. We felt it really powerful, were very powerful for us as a team to come up with the values. And some of these values you probably, it's familiar, but we did it as a team, and this is how we want to proceed. And so it was capacity building too for us, even though we were very project specific. It developed us, I think, personally as well. So we're grateful that we had that opportunity, but it was also really important as a team for us to have those conversations on some pretty tough issues. Yeah.
And maybe just one last point. I think we didn't want to have like someone talking to us for 2 hours. Like we wanted to like we wanted the learning to be through discussions and through exercises. So that was part of how we decided.
So just that the exercise you did, we weren't as clever, but they had a football field. So everyone was lined up on the mid line, and we all had, well, there were 7 of us. We were players all lined up. Didn't know who, it was anonymous. And so with every reading of the question, we would either move up one, move up back, or again. So you actually saw people going forward and people going backwards. I was one of the ones going backwards as well, right? And so it brought a lot of insights for us in that individual experience too. So, but thank you for your question.
Thank you for your answer.
Awesome. And just being mindful of time here. It looks like we're almost at time. There's just one last question here, wondering if we can share the research. So Susanna, I believe you said you're able to send the report over, and then Jessica and I can definitely send out that report. And I see Julie put her contact information there, so we will send that out as well. And as we come to the hour here, just thank you again so much, Julie and Susanna. That was such an informative presentation, and thank you for everyone who made the time today. We really appreciate it. We hope to see you at our February Lunch and Learn. And thanks.
Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to us.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, there's still lots of thank yous in the chat there. Julie, you and Susanna can see them.
Yeah, great.
Someone asked, should I answer that? It was not a blanket exercise.
No, okay, because that's what we also I think now in last 5 years or so, the all library, I am from the library, and the library, all library employees, I think, went through that kind of training, and it's very interesting. It's very interesting, and I think it really is something, the way it's delivered, as you said, like through exercises and dialogue, like it really sticks, right? So it stays with you. And that was the one of the like a trauma aware, and then there we would start at the same line, and then there were questions, and then it would be like, if you experience that, move like forward, and then people who were way ahead means that they experienced way more than others, and that is the thing that many people I don't know. People forget that it's easy to say that people shouldn't be too sensitive to everything, but like we don't know where people come from, what their situation is. We do not have all the same line where we start. Some have huge trauma, some less, and that's why I would say I agree with everyone who said that we can do this or that, and people shouldn't take it this way or the other way. But I do believe, like sometimes that's the case, but sometimes I still believe that there is there's validity in the feelings that newcomers are sharing, and how they were treated. And so anyway, I don't want to take more of your time. This was very interesting for me to hear, and thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for being here. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, have a good day. Bye.
You too. Bye.
You too. Bye.
So,
Okay,
Lindsay,
Susanna, if
I'm
you're
gonna-
okay,
Yeah.
I might end the meeting.
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm gonna be leaving.
Yes. Okay, I will send you a follow-up email. Thank you again so much. Really appreciate it. And I will end the meeting now. Thanks.
Okay, bye.